Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to introduce to you Dr. Amanda Gray. She is the owner of Gray Area out in McKinney, and she is a school neuropsychologist, licensed psychologist, and she has a lot of experience working in public schools, but also working with clients in private practice, doing executive functioning training, neuropsych testing, coaching, counseling, group counseling, social skills training, lots of amazing, really great things that all of our students tend to benefit from greatly. She is a treasure to have here with us today, and I'm so excited to hear what she has to tell us. Again, this is Dr. Amanda Gray.
Hi, nice to sort of meet all of you virtually. Sorry that I can't be there in person. Okay, so I'm going to kind of hit some high points here at the beginning. Okay, you said garbly audio. Hold on, that happens with AirPods sometimes. Hold on.
Does it sound better now?
Way better.
I don't know why AirPods do that. Sometimes they work perfectly and other times they don't. So thank you for letting me know. If y'all have questions, you can use that chat box and I'll try to answer them as we go, or I can get to them at the end. And like Philip was saying, if we don't get to all of the questions, I'll talk with him after this and figure out a way to make sure we get them all from you. So basically the point of today's presentation is to kind of go over what executive functioning even is and why it matters. It's a term we use all of the time. It's thrown out in almost every evaluation you see, especially in relation to kids with ADHD and autism. And so just kind of understanding that I think is important because a lot of times that piece isn't really covered. So what are executive functions? They are basically the tools you need for almost everything that you do that your body doesn't do on its own. So breathing, you don't need executive functions for, but everything else you do. For somebody who doesn't have deficits with executive functions, it feels the same as breathing. It's stuff that comes naturally to you. So you'll hear it called executive dysfunction or executive functioning deficits if somebody struggles with executive functioning. They're important, like I was saying, because they're crucial for everything that we do. If you struggle with executive functioning, you're going to struggle across settings. But the bigger issue is that it's very hard to understand if you don't experience it. It's also hard to understand if you do experience it because you might have some deficits with it and your child might, or even if you don't and they do, it causes a lot of strain on parent relationships. So part of what I want to do with this presentation is work on explaining what you could even expect to see in kids with ADHD or autism and what the deficits might look like, and then give you some strategies to handle them at home because they are different from person to person. But the kids who get home and tell you they have homework and they don't ever get it done and you feel like you're on their case all the time to get them to do it, you can feel the tension at home and it starts to wear on your relationship with them. And so the more we can do to get ahead of that so you don't have to worry about that, the better. So what do they even look like? So ADHD is hallmark for executive functioning deficits. One of the main ones is inattention, very easily distracted. If you're into something and you're in the middle of something you enjoy, trying to switch to something else is hard, but it's not only when you're interested in it. If you finally figured out where to start a task, trying to figure out how to switch to another one is extremely difficult. You can also get very hyper-focused on areas of interest, but time blindness is a huge one. Not having any idea how long something's going to take you, not being very good at your time management, waking your kid up in the morning and they say they're going to be ready to leave when you need to leave in 20 minutes and it's 20 minutes and they're not out of bed yet and they have no idea that 20 minutes has passed. I'm getting a few head nods, so this apparently is happening to a few of you at home. So that's a very hallmark trait of ADHD with an executive functioning deficit. So the next thing would be forgetfulness. So I know I'm kind of hitting some of this a little bit quick. So before I even go over the forgetfulness, I did write a 3-part blog series on all of this. So you'd have it to refer back to. Okay, and I've got links that I can get to Philip that they can be sent out to you. And then again, you'll be able to follow up with any questions. But forgetfulness and ADHD is a big thing. So part of the reason I got into what I do is that I have ADHD, and a psychologist diagnosed me with it. And it was the first time in my life that I realized I wasn't doing something wrong. It wasn't my fault that all of these things were easier for other people than they were for me. And I finally could take the blame off of myself. The things that I would blame myself for is I would be sent to my room to go grab my shin guards and my cleats and something else, to get ready for soccer practice, and, a hairbrush to have my dad help me put my hair up. And I would come back with a pair of socks and nothing else, or something completely unrelated. So anytime I had multi-step instructions, if I walked out of the space that it was given to me, I'm lucky to get any of those done. And trying to help kids learn how to remember all of those things is crucial. If something distracting happens, so if you give them a direction and then they walk in the other room and another one of your kids has a TV on, it'll go in one ear and right out the other, even though they were fully listening to you in the moment. Completing work and not turning it in, having the backpack that looks like a bomb went off in it, or even having a very organized backpack and having the best intention in the world of turning in your assignment, but never actually getting it turned in, or taking things home to be signed, but then they're not actually getting returned. Looks like the slides got a little messed up when I shared them with Philip. So that's what it says under there, is taking things home to be signed, but not returning them. The other big thing that will happen is reading problems. So they may be able to read very, very quickly, but trying to remember what they read, no. And comprehending it, they're probably not doing as either. So they're reading so quickly, but they're not taking in any of the material. Okay. Another hallmark of ADHD that's an executive functioning deficit is that impulsivity and inhibition. So the ability to think before you act or not interrupt. A lot of times with ADHD, your brain is moving faster than your mouth can. And there is a big fear of, if I don't get this out, I'm going to forget what it was. And that's what leads to interrupting. So does the thought of, I can't pause to think that somebody else is talking right now. This gets very frustrating. I'm sure you all experienced it during the shutdown for COVID. If you're trying to work from home or talk on the phone to anyone and your kid has a thought or a question, now is the moment for them to do it, and it is not the time for you to be listening to them. Happens all the time. A lot of times what you'll see in school or anything like that, or at home when you're asking questions, is you'll get an answer before the question is actually fully complete. It's like they guess what you're asking, and they go ahead and answer, and your response is probably like, that's not even what I was trying to ask you. So other than that, hold on, let me get to the next slide. Yep. Planning and organization. This goes back to the backpack or the desk looking like a bomb had gone off in it. So it's everything kind of just gets shoved in one place, and then it gets wadded up and ends up at the bottom. Some people are very good at organizing, so their backpack doesn't look that way, but their thoughts are disorganized. They don't always know how to initiate a task, so they pick something random and then they try to back up from it. If they have a big project for school, it's hard to break it into multiple pieces. Where do I start? What do I do next? How do I do all of this? So they'll sit down and try to do all of it at once, often at the last second, as opposed to trying to break it into manageable pieces. And it's hard, even if they can learn how to break it into manageable pieces, to figure out what's the most important thing. And then with writing, it kind of comes out, there's not a super professional way to word it, but it gets the point across. It's like word vomit. Everything that they can get out on the page at once, they get out. But then their brain omits words and they don't even realize it when they go to edit it. And so and we all do that to some degree, but if they're trying to check and make sure that everything is there, their brain's going to say they put the word "and" in there, even if it's not there. And so trying to help them, use different graphic organizers and get their thoughts organized before just spewing it on paper is really important, because otherwise it does just look like word vomit when they write. Okay. Kind of tying into some things I've referenced before. When it comes to knowing how to initiate a task, that's very overwhelming a lot of times for people with ADHD. They will often need to be told more than once to start a task, and to be specifically told where to start and what to do, because otherwise it's a little bit overwhelming. If you do have a kid that's highly disorganized, for example, and their room looks like a bomb has gone off in it, and you ask them to just go clean their room, they can walk in there and then they get so overwhelmed thinking about doing it, they don't know where to start. So helping them figure out, okay, today or in this moment, the only thing I'm going to do is pick up the clothes I know are dirty off the ground. That's it. Not working on anything else in the room. That needs to be that explicit to help them. Another big one is the emotional dysregulation. There's a big topic out there right now for rejection sensitive dysphoria, and it is not part of the diagnostic criteria right now for ADHD, but there's a lot of emotional sensitivity that goes with ADHD, and a lot of times the level of effort that someone with ADHD exerts during the school day results in even more emotional reactions when they get home afterwards because their threshold is lower. And so they might have a reaction that seems extreme to you. They might have trouble calming down. It's completely unintentional. And as a matter of fact, most people with ADHD, if they have an emotional reaction to something, then have a higher level emotional reaction because they're mad at themselves for having the emotional reaction. And so it just feeds into itself. So that's it for ADHD. You'll notice that there's a lot of overlap with that and autism, and I am just hitting the high points across both of these. But you notice that with ADHD, we had inattention, but we have that with autism too. They can seem distracted because what's going on in their head seems way more interesting than what's going on around them. Okay, especially if they're in a class, for example, that's a subject they don't really care for, they might seem not fully present because what they have going on inside their own mind is more interesting sometimes. They also can get really fixated on specific details or things that nobody else would have ever been fixated on or even realized they got fixated on. The more disinterested they are, like I was saying, the less attentive they will be. They really struggle to often be aware of how they are perceived. You just completely described my child. Yeah, I hear that a lot, actually. But they don't always know how they are perceived by other people. So they're not aware of how their behavior comes across or why it's important to not say certain things or to even monitor, am I paying attention right now? Am I doing what other people are doing? And then it's a hard balance to strike because you don't want to lose the things that are great about each individual child, but we also have a certain society that we have to fit into. So how do you strike a balance between all of those things? And yes, this will get to what do we do to help them, to answer your question. So it comes after I hit the high points of what it looks like from one thing to the next. I've got some specific tips that you can use at home. Okay. Cognitive flexibility is a big thing for people with autism usually. So another big topic right now is theory of mind. So theory of mind is this idea of understanding that you might not be thinking the same thing that I am. And that can be very hard for a kid with autism because why would anybody think different than I'm thinking? This is how everybody should think. Like, it's illogical a lot of times to them to realize that somebody might not be thinking that. And so that plays into cognitive flexibility because they're a little bit inflexible for their thoughts and accepting somebody else's viewpoints. They also have a very hard time often if they expect things to happen a certain way and that doesn't happen, or they get told to do things a different way than they used to do them, they can have a really hard time with that because this is predictable. I know what to do now, and you've thrown a kink in my plan, and I don't know how to adjust. That can come out as behavior problems a lot because they struggle to communicate that that's what's happening. And that in typical school settings can be a problem sometimes because they might act out but can't express why they're having the problem in the first place. So the more routines and schedules they have, the better. They're also very, very rule bound. So I'll hit on some of the things to do with that because you have to use it as an advantage rather than being a rules police. So, also like ADHD, anything having to do with planning and problem solving and organization can be difficult. Trying to come up with their own new ways to do something is not always the easiest thing to do. So what they'll end up doing is using the same strategy over and over again, and you might be telling them, you've tried to do it this way, and it's still not working. We need to find a different way to do it. But that's what they know. And so trying to think outside of what they know can be very difficult. A lot of times they appear disorganized to other people, but they are very organized for themselves. So trying to throw that system off can be very difficult. And then trying or having trouble formulating a plan and then communicating that with other people can be difficult because it's the assumption that everybody should just know. All right, memory. So I talked about how they focus on details that other people probably miss completely. They also recall things others do not. You might bring up a situation when you were around other people and talk about a story that happened, and they might recall, oh yeah, and they were wearing this color shirt and had this color hair and their kid was doing this, and it's stuff that you never even thought to notice because you were focused on the conversation. But they still have trouble following directions, or they might miss them completely. They can also misinterpret things. And so sarcasm or making a joke, not every kid with autism understands those. So then they take it very literal. And then when they try to recall that information, it's already off because the way they took it in the first place wasn't accurate. And then they also have emotional dysregulation that's similar to ADHD and trouble kind of bouncing back from even things that might seem minor to other people. So now to the part that y'all were asking about on how to help. Are there any questions before I start going over this piece? Okay. I think this picture is super cute, by the way. Sorry, Philip, you can go back, but it's just a cute picture. Okay, so what can we do at home? You are going to hear a lot of suggestions from me, and like I said, there's some blogs going over this. I do not expect you to do every single thing that is listed here. You are parents, and you are trying to keep your head above water half the time, especially if you have teenagers. And so just figure out what works for you and your family and just try to apply the principles of what I'm going over. So anything with schedules can help with that feeling of time blindness or difficulty with time management. So they need to be clearly defined, like what am I supposed to be doing, when am I supposed to be doing it, and what comes next. So if every week, they go to school at this time and they come home at this time, and 2 days a week they go to soccer practice, if they have a visual of that in their room to refer to every day, that might help. The issue that we have, though, is not every single thing can go according to schedule. You could try to make a schedule for everything. You could do a visual schedule and a task list and break down all the steps of brushing your teeth and getting ready for the morning and all that. But something might happen. You might lose water or electricity in your house, power surge, who knows? So trying to help them be prepared for those things happening is very helpful because nothing will ever go perfect. So anytime we can warn them in advance that a change might be happening. So even early release days coming up, because of exams, warning them in advance that they'll be going to school and they're leaving earlier than normal can reduce the stress that they feel throughout the day. Or if normally at Thanksgiving you go to this family member's house, but this year you're going here, warning them before the day of so they can mentally prepare is helpful. Explaining why the changes have to happen is also important. They don't need to know everything. A lot of times they will try to find out everything, and sometimes they think they know better than you. They don't need to know all of that, but if it's because, like, let's use the Thanksgiving example. We normally go to house A, but this year we're going to house B. If the reason is this person is sick and we can't do that right now, that's an okay explanation for them. And if you can have a plan for any unexpected change, that's also really helpful. So my best example for that is sometimes teachers call in the morning of because they're sick and they didn't get to warn the students that there was going to be a substitute. Some kids don't do well with a substitute. So having a plan for them to go to a familiar teacher to make that change and transition either back into their normal classroom or staying in the other one is something we've done a lot in schools, because a kid that shows up that really struggles with change and all of a sudden is with an unexpected substitute, they're derailed for the rest of the day. So if they know they go somewhere else on those mornings where it was an unexpected change, it automatically starts them off on a better foot. There was a question over here. Hold on. Okay, remind me to come back to the natural consequence thing. I'm going to hit some more of these slides, and then I will do that. This timer that you see, the picture on the slide, it actually lights up like a stoplight. And if you give them 10 minutes to get something done, certain intervals, it'll go from being green to yellow to red to indicate when they're out of time. So visuals like that make a huge difference. Some kids aren't going to attend to that, but phones, you can download apps and they vibrate and warn how much time is left. So there's a lot of strategies like that you can try. And the more breaks they have built in, especially on stuff that they struggle to complete, the better off they will do, and the less frustrated you will be, because they're going to take the break anyways. And that's where a lot of the tension happens between parents and their kids. Okay, next, anything to help with memory. So everybody has different things that help them. Some people do rhymes or make little songs out of stuff when they're studying, different mnemonic devices, checklists, acronyms, anything like that. One of the best things you can do, especially for kids with autism, is try to make whatever they're trying to remember personally relevant. So if they're trying to study for a test, for example, in a subject they care nothing about, if we can relate it to something they care about, that makes all the difference in the world. So when I taught Intro to Psych to college freshmen and sophomores, I would use that principle for all of them by attaching different pop culture videos to each principle we were teaching, so that they would have a visual and a thing that felt personally relevant to them to help them remember what the concept was. And then there's a lot of different executive functioning apps that are out there. Everybody kind of has different ones that they like, but for kids that have trouble remembering even what time it is, they can turn their phone into what's essentially a grandfather clock or something like that, and every hour it goes off and it reminds them to monitor their own behavior. So there's things like that out there too. All right, what you see in the picture here is a token board, and every time somebody completes what they were asked to do, they get a star. Once all 5 stars are completed, they get whatever it was they were working for. That's one way at school that we have really tried to set clear boundaries and rules and expectations before they get to do the task that they want. The more rules, the better in their mind most of the time. However, especially for kids with autism, they can swing over and become the rules police, and then they are tattling on every single person who doesn't follow the rules. Or you can have kids with ADHD who in the morning are more concerned about what their siblings are doing and whether they're all taking care of what they need to than what they're doing to get ready, and they leave their lunch on the kitchen counter and everybody else gets out the door, and you realize that when you get back home that their lunch is on the counter because they were too busy policing everybody else and what they were doing in the morning. The more concrete praise or reinforcement they can get, the better. Another thing that we do in schools is say first then or if then, and that's something that I've seen parents use very effectively at home regardless of the age of their kid. First then is very good for younger kids. If then is very good for older kids. If you do this, then this will happen. And so if they're supposed to clean their room but they want to play Xbox, trying to make it clear on that front can be very helpful. That doesn't mean it always works. A lot of times you're going to get into a power struggle then, because they just want to play Xbox and don't understand why they should ever not get to. And so that's where some of these other things come into play. Okay, so a lot of people get sensory overload, and that makes them way more distractible. So I think ADHD, for example, is misnamed. We call it a deficit of attention, but it's actually a surplus of it. So if you walk into a room and everybody around you is talking, you're taking a piece of what each person is saying and pulling them all together, and that's the one thought that you leave with. But that's not a complete thought. You've taken a piece of what everybody has said. And so it's that you're paying attention to way too many things at once. And that's where these strategies and medication, depending on what works for each person, help them kind of narrow that where they're not paying attention to everything at once. But by paying attention to everything at once, which also happens with kids with autism, you're also paying attention to all of the sensory stuff as well. So the louder the environment, the more packed that it is, the hotter it is, the colder it is, all of that increases how distracted you are because it starts to make you be more and more overwhelmed. And this is where occupational therapists can be really helpful. So consulting with them can help determine if there's any strategies that might be really helpful for your specific child. Helping them with oral administration, so reading to them and having them follow along, because if they're already sensory overloaded from other things, they're going to go back to what I was talking about and read and have no idea what they read. One of the best reading tools to use are these highlighting strips that you can see in that picture. They put it on the actual line that they are on and move it down the page as they read. I will tell you, they work very well on their own for some kids, and some kids they don't do enough because they're only blocking the lines above and below. So I have actually taken like a manila folder and cut it and put this on every other side so that you could scroll down basically with it. and you are blocking literally everything other than the one line that they're on. So if they're very distractible, I would recommend taking that approach. Now, I will say there are a lot of things that carry over to college accommodation wise. So if they get anything to do with reading resources or anything, they now have all these online apps, and some of the public schools have it for primary and secondary, and Philip could probably tell you what's available at Winston, but they actually can block all of the stuff themselves on the PDF version of the text, and it can take notes for them, and they can highlight and do all of the things I'm describing with the highlighting strips with the device. So something to keep in mind there. And the more active they are, the less overwhelmed they are from sensory information. It's a good release for the body. And so movement breaks or anything like that, even just asking them to go get the Amazon packages that are showing up at everybody's house more than they ever have right now off the front porch repeatedly in between doing their homework could make a big difference. Help with those planning and organization deficits. They don't know how to break tasks down into pieces. Now, you're not going to be able to just walk in there with most kids and say, I'm going to help you break this down. They have to kind of stumble and realize they can't do it. But one of the best things that you can do is help them learn how to even do that in the first place. So with ADHD coaching stuff that I do, I have them describe every single step that a project will take or an assignment will take, and we write them all down. And then that's how we clump things together and figure out what should be done at each time, because it's not something that they stop and think through themselves. And so if it's a research project, how many articles do I need to have? I need to have 3. I'll find 1 per day, that kind of thing, trying to break it into those pieces. And we've already talked about some of the visuals that you could use. Speech therapy is also an option. I would not saying that everybody needs this, so that's why I wrote consult on there, so that you could reach out to a speech pathologist and talk to them. They could do an evaluation if it was appropriate, and child may or may not benefit from services. And so why that applies here is getting your thoughts organized in that pragmatic social language that we see deficits with kids with autism a lot can really add to the stress that a kid is experiencing. And so the more stress they are experiencing, the more executive dysfunction they will have. So even if it feels like you can't treat everything all at once, the more we can do to chip away at it and give them the tools that they need, the better that they'll do. Social skills and counseling are another tool that you could always use. You can do it in group or individual. You can also do pieces of this at home on your own. So one thing is like modeling for them what we expect them to do, which we've heard forever as parents. Another thing that's been very, very effective is having them see themselves do it. So sometimes that's through videos. Sometimes it's through, we've taken pictures of what's my normal routine when I walk in the door after school. Okay, I'm supposed to put my jacket here and my backpack here, and they have it that they can flip through the pictures every day, and it helps them learn their routine. Julia Cook writes some fantastic books that help with social skills. You can actually find a whole bunch of them that she's actually posted the videos online of her reading them that increased a bunch during COVID. But then you can get them, they're not too expensive. They're usually about, $11 or $12, but Half Price Books has them all the time. And then there's a place called, I think it's Albies or something like that.com, and it's basically Half Price Books for the internet. And some of them, they're like $6 a piece. So one of them is It's My Way or the Highway, and that's a very common thing for people with autism to feel, and they're not very flexible. And this book talks about a kid that's not flexible and the strategies they use to try to increase that flexibility. The best things about these books is when you are the parent, it's a lot harder for kids to talk to you about their own behavior, but they can critique somebody else's. So having the books to refer to and have them to go back over with them without it being directly about them can make a big difference. There's a good one for ADHD called It's Hard to Be a Verb. I highly recommend that book. And if you're not sure whether it's right for your kid or not, look up those videos first and see what you think, and then you can always order them. A social autopsy, I'm doing this with several of my kids right now, where I have them, filmed at soccer practice or something, and we literally sit down and we go through that entire video, and they explain to me what was happening, and we come up with things they could have done differently. And if it's not a video, I get a report from a couple different like parents and the coach or something, and then the report from the kid, and we talk about why they are so different and what could be the reason for it, what we could do different next time, that type of thing. And then communication, it has to be consistent and it has to be across everybody. And that's something that I think that we struggle with a lot, especially in schools, because we get spread so thin. And that's part of the reason I ended up opening this business in the first place, was to try to help bridge the gap and help parents find people outside of the schools that could speak the in-school language and the out-of-school language, and to try to help facilitate the communication across everybody. So if teachers are finding something that works very well at school, then it needs to be shared with you as much as possible. If you're finding something at home that works well, tell the teachers. The more consistency we can do across settings, the more progress you're going to see. We've talked a little bit about this. So I do this study skills training or executive functioning training or ADHD coaching, whatever you want to call it. So all the things we've hit on today, I work on with kids. I've even got kids in college that I meet through videos and that kind of thing to help them break down things into pieces, figure out how to prioritize stuff, figure out what technology things work for them. Do they want their phone acting like a grandfather clock, or do they need it to go off every 30 minutes and just vibrate and give them a note that says, am I doing what I'm supposed to right now? So that's one of the main things that can help reduce tension for parents and kids, because kids can be way more receptive to these suggestions, even if you've been making them for years upon years, if they're not coming from you. The other thing that you can do is talk to your kid. I know that seems silly and it's something you do all the time, but the more open line of communication you have with them, the better. If you do something and then you're like, oh, I shouldn't have done that, admit that to them, because they do it every day. If they have executive functioning deficits, they are constantly making mistakes they don't want to be making. And when we can own ours in front of them, it makes them not have as much shame. If you don't understand why their math teacher is saying they have 6 missing assignments and they're telling you, but I turned all of those in, tell them that. I don't understand. So how do we get to the bottom of this? I don't know how to figure out where your assignments are and why you don't have grades for them. Check in regularly and just see how they're doing. See if they feel like they're seen, heard, and understood. Those are the things all of us want. And then the more you can do to avoid that strained relationship, the better. So the more that you can use the tools that we're talking about, and trial and error. And that's one of the things I do all the time is I consult with parents. I'm like, did that work? They say this piece did, this piece didn't. And we try to tweak it. And now we try it another way, because every kid is so different. But we have to make sure that you still have a good relationship with your kid at the end of the day. So like I told you towards the beginning of this, when I sat down to write this whole presentation and put it together, it was a lot of information to try to condense into a very short period of time. And so I decided to go ahead and write it as a blog series. So the first part gives you more detail on what executive functioning even is and why it matters. The second kind of goes over all those pieces about what they look like. And the third is what we can do to help them more. And that one I have not posted yet. That'll be coming soon. I'm trying to space them out as they get released because it's a lot of information at once. Okay.